Marcus Chun walked through the automatic doors of the Galactic Animal Shelter, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The building stretched high above him, with crystalline walls that showed glimpses of creatures from a dozen different worlds. Flying things with rainbow wings fluttered in zero-gravity chambers. Massive furry beasts lounged in climate-controlled habitats. The air hummed with alien sounds and smells that made his nose wrinkle. "Welcome to New Terra's premier interspecies adoption center," chirped a blue-skinned receptionist with 4 arms. Her voice carried the musical quality of her species. "I'm Zila. How can we help you today?" Marcus shifted his weight, suddenly feeling out of place. Everyone else in the waiting area looked wealthy, dressed in expensive clothes made from materials he couldn't pronounce. Their credit chips probably had more zeros than his annual salary as a construction worker. "I want to adopt something," he said quietly. "Maybe something that needs a good home." Zila's large eyes lit up. "Wonderful. What species were you thinking?" "We have some lovely Andromedan cloud cats. Or perhaps a singing crystal from the Vega system?" "I don't know much about alien pets," Marcus admitted. "I just don't want to help something that really needs it. Something other people might not want." The receptionist's expression softened. "Oh, you're looking for our special needs section. Follow me." She led him through a maze of corridors lined with viewing windows. Behind each one, Marcus saw creatures that made his imagination run wild. Some looked like living rainbows. Others seemed to be made of liquid metal. A few appeared to be tiny stars floating in glass containers. "Here we are," Zila said, stopping at a heavy door marked with symbols Marcus couldn't read. "This section houses our more challenging cases. Creatures with behavioral issues, medical needs, or those who have been here for a very long time." The room beyond was quieter than the main adoption area. The enclosures were larger but fewer. Many sat empty. In one corner, Marcus noticed movement in a habitat that seemed designed like a cave system. "That's Ember," Zila said, following his gaze. "She's a young dragon from the Proxima colonies. Been with us for almost 2 years now." Marcus approached the enclosure slowly. The habitat was beautiful, with artificial rocks and a small pool of water. But in the darkest corner, barely visible, he could see a shape huddled against the wall. The dragon was much smaller than he had expected, maybe the size of a large dog. Her scales were a deep red color, but they looked dull and lifeless. "What's wrong with her?" Marcus asked. Zila sighed. "She's what we call a bonding dragon. Her species forms deep, emotional connections with her chosen family. Ember was bonded to a little girl on Proxima 3, but when the colony was evacuated during the solar flare crisis, she got separated from her family. By the time we found her, the psychological trauma had already set in." Marcus pressed his hand against the viewing window. The dragon didn't even look up. "She's been depressed ever since," Zila continued. "Won't eat properly, barely moves, doesn't respond to stimulation. We've had dozens of families interested in her, but she won't bond with anyone. Dragon bonding is voluntary on both sides. If she doesn't choose you, it won't work. Has anyone tried just spending time with her without expecting anything back?" "Well, no," Zila admitted. "Most people want a pet that will interact with them right away. Ember just lies there. She's never even looked at a potential adopter." Marcus studied the small, sad creature. Something about her reminded him of himself after his wife died 3 years ago. That same hopeless curl of the body, the way she seemed to be trying to disappear from the world. "Can I go in?" he asked. Zila looked surprised. "I mean, yes, but I should warn you that she might not even acknowledge you're there. And even if you wanted to adopt her, there's a waiting period for dragons. They're considered sentient beings, so the adoption has to be mutual. Both parties have to agree." "I understand." The assistant led him to an entry chamber where he had to put on a sterile suit and pass through a decontamination field. The process felt very official and important. When the inner door finally opened, Marcus stepped into Ember's world. The habitat was larger than it looked from outside. The ceiling arched high above, painted to look like sky. The artificial rocks felt real under his hands. Water trickled somewhere in the distance. It would have been peaceful if not for the overwhelming sadness that seemed to fill the air. Marcus found a spot on the ground about 10 feet from where Ember lay curled up. He sat down cross-legged and just waited. The dragon didn't move. Her breathing was so shallow he could barely see her sides rise and fall. Her wings were folded tight against her body, and her long tail was wrapped around her like a security blanket. "Hey there," Marcus said softly. "I'm Marcus. I heard you've been having a tough time." No response. He hadn't really expected one. "I know what that's like," he continued, keeping his voice low and calm. "Sometimes the world just feels too big and too empty, right? Like nothing will ever be good again." Still nothing. Marcus settled in more comfortably. "I'm not going anywhere. I got all day." And he meant it. For the next 4 hours, Marcus simply sat with Ember. He talked occasionally, telling her about his work, about the city outside, about anything that came to mind. But mostly he just sat in comfortable silence, letting her know she wasn't alone. When visiting hours ended, Zila came to collect him. She looked amazed. "She moved," she whispered. "While you're talking, I saw her lift her head twice. That's more movement than she's shown in months." Marcus felt a small spark of hope. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "Of course. But, Marcus, I need to be honest with you. Even if she does bond with you eventually, dragons are expensive to care for. They need special food, temperature controls, mental stimulation. The adoption fee alone is 15,000 credits, plus ongoing costs." Marcus's heart sank. 15,000 credits was more money than he made in 6 months. But, looking back at Ember, still curled in her corner, but somehow seeming less isolated than before, he knew he couldn't give up. "I'll figure something out," he said. That night, Marcus lay awake calculating and recalculating his finances. His savings account had maybe 3,000 credits. His construction job paid decent wages, but after rent and food and his wife's medical debt, there wasn't much left over. He could sell his truck, but he needed it for work. He could ask for extra shifts, but there weren't always enough jobs to go around. The next morning, he was back at the shelter before opening time. Zila looked surprised to see him waiting by the doors. "You're serious about this," she said. "Dead serious." This time, when Marcus entered Ember's habitat, he brought something with him. From his lunch bag, he pulled out a simple peanut butter sandwich cut into small pieces. "I know you probably eat special dragon food," he told Ember as he sat in his usual spot. "But my wife used to say that comfort food was more about the comfort than the food." He placed a small piece of sandwich on the ground between them and ate the rest of his lunch. Ember didn't touch the offering, but Marcus noticed her nostrils flare slightly. She was at least aware of his presence. Over the following days, Marcus established a routine. He would arrive at the shelter every morning before work and spend an hour with Ember. Then he would return in the evening and stay until closing time. He brought different small offerings each day. A flower from the construction site, a smooth stone he found on his walk, a drawing he had sketched of what he imagined Ember might look like when she was happy. Gradually, incredibly slowly, Ember began to respond. On the 4th day, she lifted her head and looked directly at him for a full 30 seconds. On the 7th day, she moved closer to investigate the flower he had brought. On the 10th day, she actually ate a piece of apple he had left for her. But the breakthrough came on the 14th day. Marcus had been telling her about his wife, about how she had loved to garden, and how their small apartment had been full of plants. "She would have loved to meet you," he said, placing a small succulent plant on the ground. "She always said every living thing deserved to be cherished." Ember's head came up slowly. For the first time, Marcus could see her eyes clearly. They were golden like sunlight through honey, but filled with such deep sadness that it took his breath away. She looked at him for a long moment, then, slowly, carefully, she extended her neck and touched his outstretched hand with her snout. The moment their skin made contact, Marcus felt something extraordinary happen. It was like a warm current ran through his entire body, carrying with it images and emotions that weren't his own. He saw flashes of Ember's memories. A young girl with dark hair laughing as a tiny dragon chased bubbles. The same girl crying as sirens wailed, and people ran in panic. Darkness, confusion, fear, loneliness so deep it felt like drowning. But along with Ember's memories came something else. A tentative spark of hope, a recognition, the beginning of trust. When the connection faded, both Marcus and Ember were trembling. She had moved close enough that he could reach out and touch her head if he wanted to. Her scales, up close, weren't dull at all. They held deep red depths like garnets. Hello, Ember, Marcus whispered. I'm going to take care of you, okay? I don't know how yet, but I promise I will. Ember made a sound deep in her throat. Not quite a purr, not quite a hum, but something that spoke of contentment for the first time in 2 years. Zila found them like that an hour later. Ember curled up next to Marcus, her head resting on his leg while he stroked her neck. The bonding, she breathed. It actually happened. I can't believe it. Marcus looked up at her with tears in his eyes. Now what? Now we start the adoption process. But Marcus, about the fee. I'll handle it, Marcus said firmly. Whatever it takes. But privately, he still had no idea how he was going to come up with 15,000 credits. All he knew was that he couldn't abandon Ember now. The bond between them was real and powerful, and she was counting on him. That evening, Marcus did something he had never done before. He went to the richest district of the city and stood outside the fancy restaurants and shops with a simple cardboard sign that read, "Trying to adopt a rescue dragon. Every credit helps. Thank you." Most people walked past without a second glance. A few dropped small amounts into the hat he had placed on the ground. But after 4 hours, he had only collected 60 credits. At this rate, it would take him years to save enough money. Discouraged, but not defeated, Marcus returned to the shelter the next morning. Ember was waiting for him at the front of her enclosure, and the sight of her alert, hopeful face gave him new determination. "We're going to figure this out, girl," he promised her. Somehow, as he sat with Ember, sharing his breakfast and telling her about his fundraising efforts, Marcus noticed they were being watched. A tall alien with purple skin and elaborate robes stood outside the enclosure, observing them with interest. "Excuse me," the alien said when Marcus looked up. "I'm Ambassador Thrix of the Centauri delegation. I couldn't help but notice the remarkable bond you've formed with this dragon." Marcus stood up, feeling self-conscious. "Yes, sir. We're hoping to make it official soon. The staff tells me you're having difficulty with the adoption fee." Marcus's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I'm working on it. I won't give up on her." Ambassador Thrix studied him thoughtfully. "Tell me, human Marcus, why is this dragon so important to you? There are many pets available that would cost far less." Marcus looked back at Ember, who was watching the conversation with intelligent eyes. Because she needed someone to see her. Really see her. Not just her problems or her sadness, but who she really is underneath. Everyone deserves that. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed like pearls. "You know, the Centauri government has a special fund for promoting interspecies friendship and understanding. Your bond with Ember is exactly the kind of relationship we like to support." Marcus's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" I would like to sponsor your adoption. The full fee, plus enough for her care expenses for the first year. In exchange, would you be willing to participate in some publicity for our cultural exchange program? Nothing invasive, just a few interviews about your experience." Marcus couldn't speak for a moment. It seemed too good to be true. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. The bond you formed is remarkable. Dragons are notoriously difficult to rehome after trauma. Your success could give hope to others in similar situations." Tears started flowing down Marcus's face. Yes, absolutely. Thank you." Ember, sensing his excitement, trilled softly and pressed against his legs. The adoption process, which Marcus had expected to take weeks, was completed in 2 days. Ambassador Thrix was as good as his word, handling all the paperwork and fees with diplomatic efficiency. On the day Marcus finally took Ember home, half the shelter staff gathered to see them off. Many had tears in their eyes. Ember had become a symbol of hope for all the difficult cases, proof that even the most damaged creatures could heal with the right kind of love. Marcus's small apartment had been transformed. With Ambassador Thrix's help, he had installed proper heating and lighting for a dragon, along with a comfortable bed and plenty of space for Ember to exercise. The ambassador had even arranged for deliveries of proper dragon food and supplements. As they walked into their new home together, Ember looked around with curiosity instead of fear for the first time in years. She explored every room, sniffing and investigating, her tail swishing with something that looked almost like happiness. That first night, as Marcus lay in his bed and listened to Ember's contented breathing from her new sleeping area, he thought about how drastically his life had changed. 3 weeks ago, he had been a lonely construction worker going through the motions of living. Now he was responsible for an intelligent, magical creature who depended on him completely. But it was more than that. The bond he shared with Ember was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Through it, he could sense her emotions and sometimes even her thoughts. And she could sense his. The loneliness that had plagued him since his wife's death was finally beginning to heal. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus felt Ember's contentment flowing through their bond like warm honey. For the first time in years, neither of them was alone. 6 months later, Marcus barely recognized his life. Every morning, he woke to the gentle sound of Ember humming, a deep melodic vibration that seemed to make the entire apartment warm and welcoming. Her scales had transformed from dull red to a brilliant crimson that caught the light like fire. Her golden eyes sparkled with intelligence and affection. But the changes weren't limited to Ember's physical recovery. The bond between them had grown stronger and more complex. Marcus found himself understanding things about dragons that weren't in any textbook. He knew when Ember was hungry before she showed any signs. He could sense her moods and even share some of her memories. Most remarkably, she seemed to understand human concepts that dragons weren't supposed to grasp. "Good morning, beautiful," Marcus said as he prepared breakfast for both of them. Ember had learned to enjoy human food in addition to her specialized dragon diet, and she particularly loved the eggs and toast Marcus made each morning. Ember trilled in response, a sound that had replaced her earlier silence. Through their bond, Marcus felt her happiness and anticipation for the day ahead. She had grown confident enough to accompany him on errands around the city, riding on his shoulders or walking beside him like an exotic pet. People often stopped to stare, but Ember had learned to enjoy the attention instead of fearing it. Today was special, though. Ambassador Thrix had arranged for them to visit the Galactic Research Institute, where scientists were eager to study their unusual bond. The research could help other traumatized dragons find new homes. As they walked through the city streets toward the research center, Marcus noticed how much Ember had changed. She held her head high, her wings slightly spread to catch the morning breeze. Children pointed and giggled when they saw her, and instead of hiding, Ember would perform small tricks, breathing tiny puffs of flame or making her scales shimmer in different colors. "You're showing off," Marcus told her with amusement. Ember's response came not in words, but in images and emotions shared through their bond. She projected feelings of pride, joy, and gratitude. Marcus saw himself through her eyes, not as the ordinary construction worker he believed himself to be, but as a hero who had saved her from darkness. The Galactic Research Institute was an impressive building made of some kind of crystalline material that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. Dr. Scylla, a tall, thin alien with silver skin and large eyes, met them at the entrance. "Marcus and Ember," she said warmly. "We've been looking forward to meeting you both. Your bond has already challenged several theories about dragon psychology." She led them through corridors lined with laboratories and observation rooms. Through the windows, Marcus could see experiments involving creatures from dozens of different worlds. Some scientists were studying plant-like beings that moved and responded to music. Others worked with energy creatures that looked like living lightning. Here's what makes your relationship so interesting, Dr. Scylla explained as they entered a comfortable room with chairs for Marcus and a specially designed platform for Ember. Dragons typically bond with their own species or with species that share similar neural patterns. Humans and dragons have completely different brain structures. By all accounts, what you've achieved should be impossible. Marcus settled into his chair while Ember curled up on her platform, close enough that he could reach over and touch her head. It didn't feel impossible, he said. It felt natural. That's exactly what we want to understand. May we observe your bond in action. For the next several hours, Marcus and Ember participated in various tests. They demonstrated how they could share emotions and simple concepts through their connection. Ember showed that she could understand complex human instructions, while Marcus proved he could sense her needs and desires even when she gave no obvious signs. The most remarkable test came when Dr. Scylla asked them to solve a puzzle together. She presented them with a three-dimensional maze that had to be navigated using both human logic and dragon spatial intelligence. Marcus could understand the logical patterns, while Ember could visualize the three-dimensional relationships. Working together through their bond, they solved the puzzle in record time. Extraordinary, Dr. Scylla murmured, reviewing the data. You're not just bonded, you're developing a form of hybrid intelligence. Your minds are actually learning to work together as one system while maintaining your individual identities. As the testing continued, Marcus began to understand just how special their relationship really was. Other bonded pairs could share emotions and basic concepts, but Marcus and Ember were developing something closer to true telepathic communication. They were becoming more than the sum of their parts. During lunch break, Marcus and Ember walked through the Institute's garden, a beautiful space filled with plants from multiple worlds. Ember particularly enjoyed the fire flowers from her home system, breathing on them gently to make them bloom brighter. Dr. Scylla thinks we're changing each other, Marcus told her as they sat by a fountain. Making each other smarter and more capable. Ember projected agreement, along with images of how she saw their future together. In her visions, they were helping other damaged dragons, teaching humans and dragons how to form healing bonds. She saw them traveling to different worlds, bringing hope to creatures who had given up on ever finding families again. You want to help others like us? Marcus asked. The wave of determination and compassion that flowed through their bond was answer enough. Ember had been transformed from a victim into a healer, and she wanted to share that transformation with others. Their afternoon session at the Institute focused on practical applications of their research. Dr. Scylla introduced them to a small dragon named Spark, who had been rescued from an illegal fighting ring. He was aggressive and fearful, lashing out at anyone who tried to approach him. Traditional rehabilitation isn't working, Dr. Scylla explained. He's been here for 4 months, and he still won't let anyone near him. We're hoping that seeing your bond might help him understand that not all humans are dangerous. Marcus approached Spark's enclosure slowly, with Ember walking beside him. The young dragon was smaller than Ember, with dark green scales that looked almost black in the artificial light. His eyes darted between Marcus and Ember, full of suspicion and rage. Hey there, Spark, Marcus said gently. This is Ember. She understands what you've been through. Spark hissed and backed away, but Marcus noticed his eyes fixed on Ember with something other than fear. Dragons could sense each other's emotional states, and Ember was radiating calm, safe feelings. Ember approached the enclosure barrier and sat down, projecting peaceful thoughts. She shared images through the dragon equivalent of empathy, showing Spark her own journey from despair to happiness. She showed him Marcus's kindness, the safety of their home, the joy of being truly loved instead of feared or exploited. For the first time since his rescue, Spark stopped hissing. He crept closer to the barrier, studying Ember with intense curiosity. When she continued projecting safety and hope, he finally sat down near the barrier, still wary but no longer hostile. This is remarkable, Dr. Scylla whispered. He's never shown this level of trust before. Marcus sat down next to Ember, and through their bond, he could feel what she was feeling. Spark's pain was like an open wound, raw, and infected with trauma. But underneath the pain was a desperate longing for connection, for someone to prove that the world could be safe again. Would you like to try coming closer? Marcus asked Spark, his voice gentle. The young dragon considered for a long moment, then slowly approached the barrier. When Marcus extended his hand, Spark sniffed it carefully before allowing the briefest touch to his snout. The contact was electric. For just an instant, Marcus felt Spark's memories of cruelty and exploitation, but also his deep need for the kind of bond he saw between Marcus and Ember. It was a moment of pure communication that transcended species. When visiting hours ended, Spark was sitting calmly near the barrier, watching Marcus and Ember with something that looked like hope for the first time since his rescue. He's made more progress in 2 hours than in 4 months of traditional therapy, Dr. Scylla told them as they prepared to leave. We'd like to arrange regular visits if you're willing. Your bond could be the key to helping dragons who have lost the ability to trust. As they walked home through the evening streets, Marcus reflected on how much his world had expanded. 6 months ago, his biggest concern was paying rent and getting through each day without thinking too much about his loneliness. Now he was part of groundbreaking research that could help traumatized creatures across the galaxy. But more than that, he had found his purpose. Through Ember, he had discovered that his capacity for patience and compassion was actually a rare gift. Not everyone could sit with suffering without trying to fix it quickly. Not everyone could offer love without demanding anything in return. These qualities, which he had never valued in himself, turned out to be exactly what damaged creatures needed most. That evening, as they settled into their routine at home, Marcus began researching everything he could find about dragon trauma and recovery. If they were going to help other dragons like Spark, he wanted to understand as much as possible about the challenges they faced. Ember curled up beside his desk, occasionally offering insights through their bond. Dragons, she helped him understand, were deeply empathetic creatures who absorbed the emotions of those around them. In traumatic situations, they often took on the pain and fear of others, carrying emotional wounds that went far beyond their own experiences. That's why traditional therapy doesn't work well with your species, Marcus realized. You need someone who can offer positive emotions to absorb, not just talk through problems. Ember projected agreement, along with images of how their home felt to her. The apartment was now saturated with feelings of safety, love, and hope. Any dragon who spent time there would begin to absorb those positive emotions just by being present. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Ember fell into a new routine. 3 days a week, Marcus continued his construction work to pay for their living expenses. The other 4 days, they volunteered at the Research Institute, working with traumatized dragons who had been written off as unadoptable. Each dragon presented unique challenges. There was Crystal, a white dragon who had been kept in isolation for so long she had forgotten how to communicate with other creatures. Marcus and Ember spent hours simply sitting with her, projecting feelings of companionship until she began to remember that connection was possible. Then there was Thunder, a massive dragon who had been abused by multiple owners and now feared all physical contact. Through their bond, Ember shared with him the memory of Marcus's first gentle touch, showing him that hands could offer comfort instead of pain. The work was emotionally exhausting, but deeply rewarding. Each small breakthrough felt like a victory not just for the individual dragon, but for the possibility of healing itself. Marcus found that his capacity for patience and empathy seemed to grow with each case, as if helping others was strengthening those qualities in himself. The breakthrough that changed everything came with a dragon named Shadow, a black dragon who had been found wandering alone in space, floating in a makeshift escape pod. No one knew what had happened to his family or his home world. He hadn't spoken or responded to anyone since his rescue, spending his days staring out windows as if looking for something that would never come. When Marcus and Ember first met Shadow, the grief radiating from him was overwhelming. Through their bond, Marcus could feel the depth of loss that went beyond anything he had experienced, even when his wife died. Shadow had lost not just his family, but his entire world, his entire species as far as anyone knew. "I don't know if we can help this one," Marcus told Dr. Scylla after their first session with Shadow. "His pain is so deep, I'm not sure anything can reach it." "Maybe reaching it isn't the goal," Dr. Scylla suggested. "Maybe the goal is just to let him know he's not alone in carrying it." The words hit Marcus like a revelation. He had been approaching each case thinking his job was to fix the dragon's pain, to make them happy again. But maybe what traumatized creatures really needed wasn't someone to take away their pain, but someone willing to sit with them in it. The next time they visited Shadow, Marcus changed his approach entirely. Instead of projecting hope and healing, he simply acknowledged the dragon's grief. Through Ember, he shared his own memories of loss, not the healing part, but the raw, terrible part when the pain felt like it might never end. For the first time, Shadow looked directly at them. In his eyes, Marcus saw recognition. Here were creatures who understood what it meant to lose everything and still somehow keep breathing. That session lasted 6 hours. They didn't speak or even touch. They simply shared the experience of surviving loss, of carrying grief without being destroyed by it. When they finally left, Shadow was still staring out the window, but something had shifted. He was no longer alone in his pain. The progress with Shadow was slow and non-linear, but it was real. Other dragons at the Institute began to show interest in the sessions, as if word was spreading through their own communication networks that healing was possible. Dr. Scylla documented everything, preparing research papers that would change how the galaxy approached trauma recovery in intelligent species. But for Marcus, the real reward was simpler and more immediate. Every evening, he came home to Ember's greeting, her joy at seeing him flowing through their bond like sunshine. Every morning, he woke up knowing that his existence mattered, that he was making a difference in ways he had never imagined possible. The lonely construction worker who had wandered into an adoption shelter 8 months ago was gone. In his place was someone who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you could offer another being was simply your presence, your willingness to see their pain without trying to fix it, and your commitment to staying even when staying was hard. And through it all, Ember was changing too. She was growing more confident, more intelligent, more capable of complex thought and communication. The bond that had started as a simple rescue had evolved into something that was transforming both of them in ways that scientists were only beginning to understand. As Marcus fell asleep that night, with Ember's contented breathing providing a soundtrack to his dreams, he couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dragons who needed hope, new opportunities to prove that love really could conquer even the deepest trauma. But tonight, in the quiet of their home, he was simply grateful for the moment that had started it all, when a sad dragon in a shelter had decided to trust an ordinary human who had promised to stay. 2 years after Marcus first walked into the Galactic Animal Shelter, he stood before the Intergalactic Council of Species, with Ember perched proudly on his shoulder. The great hall stretched before them, filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds, all waiting to hear their testimony about a revolutionary new approach to interspecies trauma recovery. The journey to this moment had been extraordinary. What started as one man helping one sad dragon had grown into a movement that was changing lives across the galaxy. The Marcus Chun Dragon Recovery Center, funded by donations from dozens of species, now operated on 7 different worlds, helping traumatized creatures learn to trust and love again. Honorable representatives, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 3 years ago, I was nobody special, just a human construction worker who was lonely and looking for purpose. I had no training in alien psychology, no advanced degrees, no special qualifications. Through their bond, he felt Ember's encouragement flowing into him, strengthening his confidence. She had grown magnificent over the years, her scales now a deep crimson that seemed to hold its own inner fire. But more than her physical transformation, her presence radiated wisdom and compassion that touched everyone around her. What I did have, Marcus continued, was time, patience, and a willingness to sit with suffering without trying to rush it away. These turned out to be exactly what Ember needed, and later, what hundreds of other traumatized creatures needed too. He gestured to the viewing screens around the hall, which displayed images from their recovery centers. Dragons who had been written off as hopeless were now thriving in loving homes. Other species, too, had benefited from the techniques they had developed. The principles that worked for traumatized dragons seemed to work for most intelligent creatures who had experienced loss and abuse. Ambassador Thrix, now a close friend and advisor to their program, stood to address the council. The Chin-Ember bonding protocol has achieved success rates of 87% with previously unadoptable creatures. Traditional therapeutic approaches rarely exceeded 15% success with the same population. The numbers were impressive, but Marcus knew the real story was in the individual lives that had been transformed. There was Crystal, the white dragon who had forgotten how to communicate, now serving as a therapy dragon for children with autism. Thunder, the massive dragon who once feared all contact, had become a gentle giant who helped elderly beings with mobility issues. Shadow, the grief-stricken dragon they had met 2 years ago, was now training other humans to work with traumatized dragons. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had been in Marcus himself. The bond with Ember had unlocked abilities he never knew he possessed. He could now sense the emotional states of almost any intelligent creature, communicate across species barriers, and provide the kind of deep emotional healing that traditional therapy often couldn't reach. The secret, Marcus explained to the assembled representatives, isn't in sophisticated technology or advanced training. It's an understanding that healing happens through relationship, not procedure. When a creature has been hurt by others, they need to experience genuine love and safety before any other healing can begin. Dr. Scylla, now the director of interspecies trauma research for the Galactic Health Organization, presented their latest findings. The Marcus-Ember bond has continued to evolve in unprecedented ways. They now share not just emotions and simple concepts, but complex ideas, memories, and even problem-solving capabilities. They represent a new form of symbiotic intelligence that we're only beginning to understand. What Dr. Scylla didn't mention, but Marcus's health had improved dramatically. His reflexes were faster, and his intuition had sharpened to an almost supernatural degree. They were evolving together in ways that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about interspecies relationships. The council session continued for hours, with representatives asking detailed questions about implementation, training, and funding. But Marcus's mind wandered to the message he had received that morning, the one that had convinced him their work was more important than ever. A distress call had come from the Outer Rim territories. A massive disaster had left thousands of creatures orphaned and traumatized, including species that had never been encountered before. Traditional relief efforts were failing because no one knew how to communicate with the survivors, much less help them heal from their trauma. "We need you," the message had said. "You and Ember represent our best hope of reaching these creatures before they're lost forever." After the council session, Marcus and Ember retreated to the quarters that had been provided for them. The space was luxurious by his old standards, but Marcus found himself missing the simplicity of their first apartment together. Success had brought many wonderful things, but it had also brought complexity and responsibility that sometimes felt overwhelming. "Do you ever miss the old days?" Marcus asked Ember as they settled in for the evening. "When it was just the two of us figuring things out." Ember's response came through their bond in layers of meaning too complex for words. She shared memories of those early days, the quiet mornings when they were learning to trust each other, the simple joy of small breakthroughs. But she also shared her vision of what they had become and what they could still become. Their bond had made them capable of touching thousands of lives, of spreading healing across the galaxy in ways that would have been impossible alone. She showed him images of the creatures they had saved, now living happy lives with families who loved them. She projected the gratitude of the humans and aliens who had learned their techniques and were using them to help others. Most powerfully, she shared her sense that their story was just beginning, that the bond between them was still growing and evolving towards something unprecedented. "You're right," Marcus said, feeling his uncertainty fade. "We can't stop now. There are too many others who need what we've learned." The next morning brought news that would test their resolve. The disaster in the Outer Rim was worse than initially reported. An entire solar system had been destroyed by an unknown cosmic phenomenon, and the refugee ships were filled with survivors from dozens of species, many of them children who had watched their worlds die. Traditional counselors and therapists were being overwhelmed. The trauma was too fresh, too deep, and complicated by the fact that many of the survivors couldn't communicate with the rescue workers. Several refugee ships had reported that some survivors had stopped eating or responding to stimuli, essentially willing themselves to die rather than face their new reality. "They need us to go there personally," Ambassador 3. "Your presence, your bond, might be the only thing that can reach some of these survivors." Marcus felt a familiar flutter of doubt. The scale of the disaster was so massive, the suffering so overwhelming. What could one human and one dragon really accomplish in the face of such devastation? But Ember's certainty flowed through their bond, washing away his fears. She projected images of their journey together, from that first moment of connection in the shelter to this moment of decision. Every step had prepared them for something larger than themselves. Every dragon they had helped had taught them something new about healing and hope.